Okay, and welcome to the Parenting in a Pandemic series. I just want to confirm that I am on live stream, so give me just 1 second. Okay, welcome to the Parenting in a Pandemic series. My name is Dr. Maribel Del Rio Roberts, and I welcome you to discuss our current topic on educational alternatives to traditional schooling during the pandemic. So I just want to make sure that you all are viewing my video, and I am live. Excellent. So I just wanted to make sure that you all could see me. So I'm Dr. Maribel Del Rio Roberts. I am an associate professor here at the Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice at Nova Southeastern University. And given all of the challenges that we have been experiencing as parents, and I work a lot with parents as a psychologist, and also being a parent myself, I realized that there was a need to talk about, especially with the upcoming school year looming large, and as parents being put in the position to make decisions about our children's future schooling, I really thought that it would be important to talk about a little bit about what are some of our options and what are things that we have to consider, what are some of the pros and the cons that we should consider when we are considering options for the next school year. So this is the first episode in a 6-week series that will take place, and I look forward to getting started. So let's talk a little bit about what the impact of the pandemic has been on traditional education. So life as we know it has changed. And based on all of the recommendations put forth by the CDC for schools, certain modifications have had to be made. And so we have to keep in mind some guiding principles when we're thinking about considering what the school year is going to look like next year. And some of these guiding principles that have been put forth by the CDC include, okay, what are some of our lowest risk options? our slightly more moderate risk options, and then our highest risk options. And as they presented these and they considered the virtual option only to be our lowest risk option when we're thinking about exposure to COVID-19. A moderate risk would be potentially small in-person classes, activities, events, where the same groups of students tend to stay together and they'll remain together throughout the day and the groups don't really mix. Having students remain 6 feet apart and not sharing materials or toys or work in workstations, and having some of these or offering some of these staggered or rotated schedules to try to accommodate these smaller class sizes. And then the highest risk option would be the full-size in-person classes and activities, where students are not necessarily spaced apart and they're mixing, sharing materials and potentially switching and mixing between classes. So when we think about some of the modified layouts and the suggestions put forth by the CDC, some of these include having students spaced 6 feet apart, as previously mentioned, having desks turned in a particular direction. So having everyone face in the same direction rather than facing each other and maybe tables, as some younger children might have been placed before in classrooms. Creating distance between children on school buses. And we're going to talk a little bit about what some of this would look like. And I have some visuals to show you all in terms of what this would look like with the modifications that have been suggested. And having one child sit in one row and skipping rows on the bus when possible. So that significantly decreases capacity. Installing physical barriers if necessary, such as maybe sneeze guards and trying to remain 6 feet apart from reception areas. Closing communal spaces, so not having breakfast and lunch in the cafeteria, not having gymnasiums or school gyms available, and closing down playgrounds. So this substantially obviously limits the ability for children to go out to recess and to engage in these social experiences. So even if children were to return to school and be on campus, their ability to socialize would still be significantly decreased, even if they were attending full-time. Having children bring their own meals or potentially serving individually plated meals in the classroom. And providing virtual activities in lieu of field trips. And now we have plenty of museums and other sites that are offering these virtual experiences as well. So these are some of the general modifications and recommendations that have been put forth. So what are my options? So I'm considering possibly maybe or advocating for traditional schooling, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons to that later on, but what are some other options that I could consider? And so I'm going to talk a little bit first about the blended hybrid or flexible learning classroom, because a lot of schools are now considering this as their predominant, or school districts are considering this as their predominant model. And pretty much what this model refers to is these are classes in which there's a carefully planned blend of both traditional classroom instruction and online learning activities. And again, I emphasize the carefully planned blend. It should not be done haphazardly. That combines the best of both styles of instruction, and that the student can complete some e-learning activities independently at home on the days that they're not on campus. Other models that are blended or hybrid might include the teacher actively conducting lectures and activities, either via live stream or offering pre-recorded videos. And by organizing face-to-face instruction, whether it's every day or potentially on some days or on a rotation, around smaller cohorts of students, to always keep the same small groups of students together to really overcome some of the bigger hurdles or obstacles to reopening, which is really to adhere to those social distancing protocols, not only in the classrooms, but also on students that rely on buses to get to school every day. So when we look at what are some of the advantages of a hybrid schedule, it does offer some advantages. For example, they have different options, and thinking about, okay, maybe they can focus on some of the core subjects. maybe just offering English, Spanish, social studies, and math, and science to, in the classroom, and maybe offering some of the electives online, or potentially offering online learning to only special populations, students from low-income families, or students that are English learners, or that require special education services. And then obviously the best model would be to combine the best practices from virtual and in-person instruction to really create a robust learning environment in both settings. So I just wanted to give you all a little bit of a visual of what a hybrid scheduling option could potentially look like. And there are many ways that school districts might present them. I know in South Florida, some of the districts have already started presenting some of their reopening plans, which a lot of them seem to be favoring a hybrid schedule and offering 100% online virtual learning options as well. But these are some of the traditional hybrid models that some school districts around the country are considering, potentially offering either a half-day scheduling option where a group of students attends in the morning and another in the afternoon. And this is called, or shift scheduling. So attending on alternate days. So certain groups attend school on alternating days, or having one group attend only one day a week and everybody pretty much attends, and having much smaller groups, and staggering those throughout. So these are just some of the ideas that they're considering. And when you think about arranging some of the challenges that the school districts are facing when it comes to arranging instructional spaces, they have to consider that 6-foot perimeter around the student. So you see, it's not only 6 feet apart in the forward direction, but also diagonally and horizontally as well. So they have to create this perimeter, which substantially limits capacity. So in a traditional classroom where they might have been able to fit 31 students, you might only be able to accommodate 12 students in a socially distanced capacity. So let's talk about that first option, that first hybrid option. Potentially maybe just offering in-person attendance for students with specialized needs. So this potential option that some school districts may consider focuses on providing students with special education needs, or that are English language learners, or who come from vulnerable populations such as homelessness or foster care, or low-income families, offering them the opportunity to be in school every day. And then full-time remote learning would be offered to all other students. And so the reason why this is an option that some districts are considering is because they really had a hard time when we transitioned to the online environment, and the school district was just, schools were just kind of unexpectedly having to accommodate and adjust. Some of these students were the most vulnerable, and they're the ones that struggled the most with adapting to the remote, online, more independent learning piece. So a lot of proponents of this potential option say that this should be offered to the most vulnerable students first. Then we have, just some of the pros and cons of this approach. Some of the pros is that it helps keep the staff members and students in the buildings, the number of students limited, so that they can comply with social distancing, and that the students with the most academic and special support needs do receive them. However, there's still some risk for exposure, as any on-campus modality, there would be with any on-campus modality. And working parents of students who continue with remote learning may object to their student missing out on in-person attendance if it's not compatible. And that's always a challenge for parents that don't have flexible work schedules, or are working from home at the present time, or maybe it's a family of first responders. And so figuring out how to make that work with their schedules could be challenging in any hybrid option offered. Then there's the second option that I briefly mentioned was the core subjects that are available for only in-person sessions. So for example, alternating days and having students attend only the basic math, English, science, social studies, history, and having electives taken online. So this is great because, the core, more substantial courses that they're often evaluated on standardized testing and other things is covered in the classroom setting and tends to be more compatible with a parent's work schedule. However, there's still some risk for exposure. And with more students, it becomes more difficult to practice that social distancing because it's assuming everyone, most students would be receiving these core subjects in person. And then elective courses, which often tend to be one of the major motivating factors as to why students want to attend school, whether it's photography class or music class or art. These are the things that really keep them engaged in schooling, and by moving them online, that can really create, you know, maybe some lack of motivation or disinterest in attending school online or in person, better said. Then we have option 3, which is offering elementary school students only in person, and then middle and high school students attending remotely. So this suggests because younger learners have a more difficult time adjusting to the online learning environment, and high school and middle school students tend to be a bit more independent, that they offer this and utilize some of those middle school and high school buildings to provide instruction to the elementary school students so that social distancing can still take place. So for an example, in the Mississippi Department of Education, elementary school students will attend 4 days a week, allowing the district to use all of its buildings for teaching to comply with the social distancing guidelines, and older students remain receiving instruction online. It really is a temporary option until, you know, districts and counties and states start relaxing some of their regulations. But there are some pros and cons to this approach. Again, some of the pros is it minimizes the support that younger students might need in an online learning environment. However, it does, again, there is some risk for exposure, and middle school and high school students will miss out on some of those in-person learning experiences, their labs, their biology labs or chemistry labs, or even the, you know, just being able to wave to their friends in person that are so important to preteen and teenagers. And this might be incompatible with some parents' work schedule, especially if they have students of different grade levels. So if you have a high school student and an elementary school student, that might create some challenges for the parent as well. And then option 4 is a split schedule, which would be AM, PM, where some students arrive in the morning and the afternoon. And that there are some challenges to this particular approach. And there are some benefits as well. Some of the benefits are that students receive daily in-person instruction, and there is smaller groups because they are kind of assigned to morning or afternoon shifts. However, again, some risk of exposure. Working parents are going to need alternative childcare for certain parts of the day. So if you are working all day and your elementary school child is not assigned to go to school till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, how do you maybe get your child there? And do you have access to someone that can do that? Or how do you coordinate with a childcare facility to make that happen? So it can, that modality seems to often be less favored because it does present a lot of logistical challenges, not only for parents, but also for schools in terms of cleaning and sanitation and having to arrange busing schedules and transitioning people on and off campuses. And so again, you know, just kind of to emphasize a little bit the importance of lesson planning when it comes to considering a hybrid schedule, you know, making sure that interactive discussions and hands-on activities are emphasized in the classroom, some of those labs or some of those experimental activities, and one-on-one instruction time potentially for more vulnerable students. And then reserving certain other activities for more online remote learning, such as potentially viewing video presentations or completing certain worksheets independently, and not taking up valuable in-person time with worksheets and busy work, and maybe allowing the student to complete those more independently at home. So how do we really make hybrid schedules work? Well, the first piece is that we need to consider curriculum and grading. You know, courses that are taught online really need high quality curricula. And they do have to be aligned to the state standards to make that sure that children are learning and grasping what's expected of them. And that they are also accessible to English language and special education students. So these are all a lot of multifaceted components that need to be incorporated when planning. And grading policies really have to be updated to reflect the online components, and making sure that there's an alignment between grades, regardless of the modality that is being offered at that point. Okay, so let me now talk a little bit about from the teachers. What do we need teachers to kind of, how do they contribute in order to make this work? Well, in some cases, districts are going to have to work with teachers unions to make changes to the school day, if they're extending the school day in some way or modifying it. You know, in some states, a minimum number of hours count as a full day. And that's going to affect how long students can stay in buildings during each shift, particularly for school districts that might choose a split schedule format. They might need to revise their teaching schedules. So some in-person classes might need to be extended, and others might need to be truncated. And teachers really need guidance on how to use the best how to best use the face time that they have with students. Again, not having them complete independent work in the classroom, but rather ensuring that they're fully maximizing the instructional time that they get with students when they have them in the classroom. Adopting some of these flipped classroom models where students spend time watching and doing some of the prep work ahead of time, watching some of the videos ahead of time, and then they come to class and they're ready to engage in discussion and active learning. Clearly outlining and communicating to teachers what their new roles are, along with what the expectations are for fulfilling these roles. And some of them will need professional development in order to be able to navigate that successfully. And you might need more teachers in order to make the hybrid model succeed. That could mean hiring additional teachers or increasing the substitute pool to help teachers with the workload, or if teachers become ill or need to attend to someone, that they have alternatives and other people to fill in. And for students, you know, what we really need to see happen in order to make this work is to offer virtual orientation for students and parents so they understand how the hybrid days are going to work. They're not confused and going into it blindly, which increases their anxiety about being able to navigate it successfully. Providing easy to access IT support for students when they're learning from home. What happens if my link on a particular platform isn't working? How do I access that website? How do I remedy this? Who do I contact? Having all this information readily available to students and families. Conducting early assessments to determine where students are academically. Because a lot of students were impacted negatively by, you know, the change, you know, into remote learning that wasn't necessarily, we didn't have the opportunity to prepare for. So teachers really have to be able to build in the opportunity to also remediate a little bit. Planfully care for the needs of the most vulnerable students, and consider increasing the number of IEP meetings for special education students, and holding regular meetings with families of English language learners to make sure that they're getting their needs met, that they feel that they're successfully navigating the process, and to figure out what supports they need, if not, in order to make that happen. And finally, when it comes to the operations piece, developing new bus schedules. You know, you have to make sure that there's enough buses for multiple routes and picking up students at different times. Providing childcare for teachers and parents who need a safe and supervised option when they aren't able to be available to their child because of work commitments. And to plan for and provide adequate protective gear for staff and students, posting signs to remind everyone on campus to follow social distancing rules and following those local health guidelines. So just to kind of reference back to the whole piece about, you know, how capacity is decreased, I wanted to show you all, you know, in terms of riding the bus and how many more buses and bus drivers would need to be available. So if you have a student riding without a mask, the recommendation is that there is one student seated per every other row on alternating sides. So that decreases the capacity substantially. So a normal capacity on a school bus is about 56 students. If you want them to be properly socially distanced with no masks, you have about 7 students on one bus. And if you have them wear masks and they wear masks, it's 1 student per seat in the left and right positions to create that distance. And you can fit approximately 28, but again, as you see, you're decreased by either 50% capacity or 88% capacity. And so just kind of to summarize in terms of the benefits and limitations of the blended and hybrid learning format, you know, some of the benefits is that it does give in-person, limited in-person instruction, does give districts a chance to at least offer some sort of in-school classes to most vulnerable students. It does not require students to travel to campus on a daily basis. It reduces the traffic on campus. It frees up classroom space. It helps to improve computer skills and encourages self-directed learning and time management for students. However, some of the limitations are that they might not consistently provide students with the opportunity to ask questions in real time. Revising master schedules and ensuring that there are sufficient teachers to cover multiple sections of classes might be a challenge, particularly since middle school and high school students often change classes. Figuring out new bus schedules. Some of the adaptations will be costly. Workloads may be heavier for some, particularly teachers. And the continuity of instruction between fluctuating between in-person and remote learning will be a challenge for some. So that's kind of a summary of the blended hybrid format. Now I want to transition and talk a little bit about the full-time learning model, a full-time virtual learning model. And so some students might decide that they want to decrease the risk and for exposure, and maybe their rate of transmission is too high in their communities, and they decide they're just going to go completely all remote online. So that might be an option. So schools really have to figure out how they can improve upon, school districts in particular, from what we did in the spring, right? So in the spring, schools weren't able to prepare, plan ahead. It was kind of an unforeseen situation. But now we need to put some careful planning into how do we engage our students and provide them with quality instruction if they are receiving instruction 100% virtually. And so the parents and students' expectations will be higher now for the experience. You know, a lot of parents and families understood that, you know, this was something that teachers and school districts were not prepared for. But now there's time to plan ahead. So an all remote schedule at this point must come a lot closer to replicating a traditional in-school experience for the students and the teachers. But what do you really need to make this all remote model work? Well, one of the things is sufficient internet speed. So we need to make sure that in-home students have access to the internet and that their internet speed is sufficient enough to meet their needs to be able to stream particular platforms, learning platforms. We need a learning management system with developed curriculum content. Every child needs a device and Wi-Fi access. And teacher training on virtual instruction is crucial. And so for students that are, you know, might be considering, or parents that might be considering 100% e-learning, there's also the option. So we have that virtual, there's different options. You have 100% e-learning through the student's homeschool that some districts are considering. Particularly, I can tell you here in South Florida, a few of the districts will be offering that, or 100% virtual through the county or state virtual academies that I will talk about as well. But I'm going to start off talking about instruction offered through the child's homeschool. Students are affiliated to the homeschool, so they are still a student of that particular school. They have designated virtual teachers that will provide full day virtual instruction to students in their virtual classroom. And teachers are expected to live stream lessons and provide online assignments that mimic full-time live attendance on campus as much as possible. Some of the cons to this approach is that, or some of the pros, is that there's low risk of exposure to the virus, consistency in delivery of the learning modality, so they're not constantly switching from being in school to having to adjust to be online. There's a familiarity of teachers and peers because these are students that generally are also maybe have been in some of their classes or they're familiar with these teachers. And the instruction is provided by teachers that are affiliated to their homeschool, which helps to facilitate eventually the transition back into traditional learning setting. Okay, so when we think about that's the offered through the homeschool option, then we have e-learning offered through county or state virtual academies. Some of the benefits or some of the things to consider is that it is also tuition free, and they do provide a state standards-based curriculum, but students are not affiliated with their local neighborhood homeschool. They are students of, for example, I'm going to speak to Florida since that's where I reside, either Florida Virtual School or Broward Virtual School, which is the county in which I'm located. Students are required to participate in statewide standardized testing, and there is flexibility, but there is still some structure incorporated into this approach. Students do follow a fixed 80-day school schedule from August to June. And students that do complete the district graduation requirements are able to receive a standard diploma. And so students typically will take about 6 courses per semester. But the difference from the e-learning offered through the county or the state in comparison to offered through the homeschool is that through the homeschool, they generally would be expected to be available maybe 8 to 2 or 9 to 1 or whatever the hours are designated for schooling by the school. However, through the state and county virtual academies, the courses are available 24/7. So if a parent has a complicated work schedule and maybe can't really, maybe works in the mornings and has a couple of breaks in between, they can potentially help guide their student at whatever time is convenient for them, whatever time and place is convenient for them. They do provide certified teachers that do give one-on-one attention. They're available for conferences and phone calls. And students can connect with peers through online clubs and sometimes in-person activities eventually when those are offered. So we've talked a little bit about hybrid schedules and we've talked about the 100% virtual options. Let's talk about homeschooling because it does differ a little bit from the remote options. So parents decide to homeschool their children for a variety of reasons. They probably want the educational freedom so that they can educate their child on topics that are important to them as a family. And many times they do enjoy the religious freedom to provide their children with certain faith-based education that public schools cannot provide. But the parents are responsible for selecting and designing their child's curriculum and assessing the child's progress. Many follow their own academic timelines regarding school start and end dates, as well as grade level promotions. And some of the benefits to this approach is that homeschoolers really are able to take control of their schedules, and they put plenty of, and they have time for non-academic activities to incorporate into their day. Parents that understand their child's rhythm, if their child really isn't their most focused at their best until noon, they might not start their instruction until noon, or they know what types of activities or subjects appeal to the child in order to ensure that the child masters the content. Children can play outside and use unstructured time as learning activities. Children can sleep more. One of the challenges that are often or limitations of a more structured approach is that children are required to be available for schooling fairly early in the morning. And not all children do well at that time. So it does provide them that flexibility and allows them to take breaks whenever is necessary when they become frustrated or need to step away. And again, they can emphasize different learning approaches, either faith-based approaches, experiential, or learning, or different learning styles. And again, there's little risk of exposure. But some of the cons is that a homeschool curriculum is time intensive. To design the curriculum and to monitor the child's progress through that curriculum, students do not have a cohort with which they progress throughout their school years because they're generally kind of progressing at their own pace. Social outings are generally coordinated by the parents, so they do require parents to be available to carry these out. And given the practice of social distancing, some of these social outings may be difficult to coordinate and may have to be conducted around, you know, whatever limitations are available online, or whatever options are available online. Although homeschool does provide some opportunities for community partnerships, you know, one of the major challenges or limitations is that children sometimes lose out on that social and emotional growth that they get from engaging with their peers. But there are in many communities, there's a strong homeschool network where they meet up to engage in physical education activities or social outings and to play dates. And so if, you know, your child begins on that particular schedule, or there's a small group that you feel comfortable potentially exposing your child to, a familiar children, you might still have that opportunity to provide social activities for your child. And then a lot of students tend to engage in outside extracurricular activities as well. So I did include some of the most popular homeschool programs, and you can reference the National Homeschool Association or the American Homeschool Association. And these are some of the more popular programs that you can look into. Some of them are faith-based, some of them are secular, some of them are experientially based. So you really, there's lots of options to choose from. And then we have the private school model. And private schools really vary in their approach and emphasis areas. You have faith-based private schools, you have college preparatory schools, you have Montessori schools and language immersion schools where they might focus on French or Spanish. You have special education schools that are tailored to children with ADHD or learning disorders or autism. There are boarding schools which are residential. I'm not sure how many of those would be available at this point. You also have single-sex schools, military schools, and the Waldorf schools. So some of the pros of potentially considering a private school is that there's less emphasis on standardized testing in private schools in general. They may tend to offer smaller classes, may incorporate high specific areas into the curriculum, maybe things like robotics or astronomy might be incorporated into the curriculum. And some private schools may even offer full-time 100% traditional schooling returning in the fall for parents that favor this approach, and it might not be available through the traditional schoolhouse model. Some of the cons is that it might be costly, and financial aid available does vary. There's less accountability to state agencies and accrediting bodies. Unless it's a special needs school, schools are not really required to provide services or accommodations to ESE students or to follow existing individualized education plans. So each school really has its own unique acceptance guidelines and standards for academic progress, and they might not offer transportation to and from school. So I want to talk a little bit about the traditional schoolhouse model offered via public school. So some school districts might decide to transition to, if there isn't necessarily a very high incidence of the virus in their area, they might tend to offer the traditional schoolhouse model. And that would include, though, a very strong emphasis on hygiene practices. So frequent hand washing, adding sanitizers to the classrooms, increasing cleaning and sanitation of commonly used areas, discouraging staff from sharing and using communal supplies. And there would be no changes to the bus schedule, the length of the school day, or how classes are run in general, but just more of a heavy emphasis on hygiene. Practicing hygiene. Some of the pros is that students get to be back in school with their peers, their teachers, in their familiar routines. Parents can resume their normal work schedules, and the cost for operating generally tends to remain relatively stable. However, some of the cons is that it's really the highest risk for exposure and transmission of the virus. And it's the riskiest option because if an outbreak occurs, then the school has to shut down and immediately start up remote learning, and they should have some sort of backup plan in place at that point, if that does happen. So all students take in-person classes every day, potentially, you know, with everyone potentially, hopefully spaced 6 feet apart, and maybe older students wearing masks in accordance with the social distancing guidelines. Maybe having schools repurpose large areas like libraries or gyms and turning them into collaborative workspaces so that they can, or classrooms, so that they can accommodate more students. Or even purchasing temporary or leasing temporary modular classrooms. So the goal is really to stay as close as possible to the traditional school day with little interruption to the educational programming. So really when space is an issue, how time is accommodated is really the biggest factor. So in trying to make this particular model work, there really has to be detailed information ahead of the reopening about any changes that will take place to the building layouts, social distancing guidelines that need to be put in place, and maybe allowing the students to visit the building before reopening so that they can experience the new setup. Limiting student movement from class to class. So maybe potentially instead of having students rotate or change classes, having teachers kind of rotate or be the one to rotate into the classes, particularly in older grades. And knowing which teachers and staff feel comfortable with returning and which should be replaced and maybe offered a virtual teaching option. Some of the benefits is that, again, that in-person instruction and connection with peers is available, which is really the ultimate goal. And that, you know, school leaders can really offer more effective programs to address some of those learning losses that took place in the spring and now over the summer, and also potentially offer some social, emotional, and mental health supports as well within the school setting. Peer-to-peer collaboration is more robust, and parents have less responsibility for overseeing the daily learning of children. However, some of the cons is that this is the highest risk for exposure and transmission, and an outbreak really can interrupt in-person teaching and create some real barriers. But with social distancing as well, space can become a constraint and almost impossible in some schools. They just don't have the space to make it happen. Some parents may eventually opt out, so they do have to offer some alternatives. And some teachers might leave. There might be some attrition because they're afraid of risking their own health or the health of their loved ones. So having a backup pool would be important. And the cost will go up because districts will have to buy masks and other protective personal equipment for staff and students. And that could be expensive or difficult to find. New expenses for cleaning supplies, hiring more cleaning staff, more frequent cleaning and sanitizing, and districts may have to buy or lease more buses to create more more frequent routes or more routes in general. So can teachers really teach effectively wearing a mask? So this is a question, I guess, that's kind of, you know, up for debate, and I think really teachers are the best suited to answer it. But experts tend to say that wearing a mask can help prevent, obviously, the transmission of the virus when a person coughs, sneezes, or talks. And a lot of teachers understand the safety rationale for that, but it does seem to be daunting because will it be comfortable for a teacher to teach and talk for up to 8 hours in a mask? How will it affect instruction? How will it affect for young learners, for English language learners that you really use facial expressions and the mouth to really, you know, decipher or understand what's going on in the context, or a language delayed student? And will a face covering make it difficult to form relationships with a new group of students? As a teacher, if you can't smile during your lesson or when you're trying to bond with new students, that might create some challenges, as well as for the students within themselves. So there's kind of been this question thrown out there of whether, it'd be more helpful to use masks or face shields. There really haven't been any large scale studies out there that measure the effectiveness of masks versus face shields in preventing the transmission. But unlike with face masks, which are proven to help protect others, when an infected person wears one, there's no real research to say how well the face shields can contain a person's viral transmission. It's more to protect the person on the receiving end when it comes to face shields, but not necessarily, we don't know how much it protects the person that's not wearing the face shield. So what should I consider when I'm trying to make a decision? There are different factors. So you're kind of thinking about all this information, trying to make the most informed choice for yourself and for your child. And you have to think about child factors and your own familial or parental factors. So vulnerability to illness. What is the child's susceptibility to illness? First off, what's the child personality? Are they more reserved, and would it be overwhelming to put them in this kind of situation where they have to adhere to, tolerate a lot of distress and adhere to all these strict rules and be reminded to engage constantly in these self-hygiene practices? Or are they more flexible and outgoing and adjust more easily? The child's age is another factor to consider. Do you feel that your child, based on their age, is better able to handle an online learning environment compared to a kindergartner? Maybe a 10th grader might do better than a kindergartner or a first grader who doesn't have the attention span to be able to focus for an extended period of time, or would need parental support in order to make that happen. The child's learning style, and as well, how independent is the child? If you have other things to attend to, because realistically, none of us would be able to potentially sit next to our children 100% of the time when they're doing remote learning. Do they have periods of time where they can work independently so that you can also stagger in your own obligations or commitments? And then you have to think about unique parent factors as well. So what is the vulnerability to illness for the adults in the child's life? Not only parents, but potential extended family members or other adults that interact with the child. Your own risk tolerance. If you're going to send your child to school and you're going to be anxious and worried about whether they're keeping their mask on and they're washing their hands 5 times a day and whether they're properly spaced out, whatever the situation is, that might not necessarily be a conducive environment, because oftentimes then children pick up on parents' anxiety as well. The amount of time and patience as a parent that you have to supervise online learning due to work schedules or other commitments. Some of us have a little more flexibility in our work schedules, or we're a little bit more patient, and some of us are not. So we have to really kind of be reflective and think about that. What type of training will the teachers have when they either combine that classroom or online learning, or when they're expected to only provide online learning? What safety protocols will the school follow when the child is on campus? And knowing those is also something to consider. And do the benefits of sending children to school or schooling outside of school, educating outside of school, outweigh the risks? So where do more of the benefits lie for you when it comes to sending your child? Do the benefits outweigh the risks for traditional, hybrid, private school, homeschool, or virtual learning? And you have to kind of think about all of these factors in order to really make the informed decision. And again, you can only make a decision based on the information that you have at the present time. And there's the right decision for one family is a right decision for one family, and everyone has unique circumstances. And we don't need to justify our decisions to other people. We just have to make sure that we feel comfortable with the decisions that we're making. So I appreciate you all joining in and taking the time to participate and listen to this Facebook Live. And if you have any questions or you'd like to reach out, I've listed my email and my phone number. I will be offering a series. I will have another episode that will focus on some summer strategies to keep your children engaged next week. So tune in on Monday at 7 p.m. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy your day, your evening.